Good Monday afternoon to you. It's 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Hope you had a great weekend. Plenty of Browns to talk about a little later in the show. Tim Bielek from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com will join us, as will legal analyst Daniel Wallach, co-host of the Conduct Detrimental podcast as well as the website, talking a little bit about some Deshaun Watson updates, and that's where we begin. Charles Robinson, writer for Yahoo Sports, was on a podcast that he hosts, and he talked about Sue L. Robinson's timeline for issuing a decision on the Deshaun Watson case. This is from the UPod to Win the Game NFL podcast. Dan Wetzel, Charles Robinson.
I was surprised to talk to someone over this weekend where we were talking about what's going on with Deshaun Watson. When does Sue Robinson issue her opinion and all this stuff? They actually said, you know what, we might have to be more patient than we expected. And that means everybody involved. I think the league, Deshaun Watson's camp, and the Cleveland Browns all sat there and said, well, we're going to have the decision by the end of next week. I still personally think that's what's going to happen. But I talked to somebody that said, she wants to be as deliberate as possible. She wants to answer every single question people are going to have, and she's going to be on her own timeline. And I was like, what does that mean? And this source said, it means she doesn't care if the NFL wants this done by the time camp kicks off, or the Browns, or Deshaun Watson. And I said, does that mean that they could potentially start the camp with this, start training camp in Cleveland with this decision still not issued? He said yes.
And again, that's Charles Robinson on that podcast. Same podcast, Robinson on why he believes Judge Sue Robinson is being very deliberate and taking her time with her decision. Again, this is from the UPod to Win the Game NFL podcast.
I think this is also Sue Robinson looking at everybody involved and saying, you guys need to come to a compromise. Like, you need to come to some kind of a compromise and cut a deal that works for all sides. Because what I do here is going to set a precedent, and one of you is really not going to like it. And it might be the league. The league might sit there and go, whoa, like this is, we did not expect this. And we have a significant problem on our hands now because now we have to appeal this decision and overrule this judge.
And one more time, Charles Robinson and Dan Wetzel on the league's handling it. So basically how they handled the whole Deshaun Watson disciplinary hearing.
I will say this too, and I'm extremely confident in this statement. Not everybody in the league office agrees with the entire approach to this. I think there are different camps in the league office who, in terms of Watson and everything that's happened, I don't even think there's a unified front inside the NFL's office in terms of what should happen here. I think there are varying opinions of how this was handled. So that though is overriding. Like we're going to talk about Cleveland in the future, but we all know right now everything rests on Watson. That is the overriding issue here.
Boom or bust this year. Boom or bust.
With that, let's welcome in Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram. You can also read him, brownzone.com. And Scott, that's kind of the crux of the matter there at the end. This roster is set up to win. If Deshaun Watson is, in fact, the quarterback for a significant amount of games, they're a whole lot better than if Jacoby Brissett has to play a significant number of games.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And regardless of the stature of Deshaun Watson, this would be a huge story, especially for the Browns. But given his importance to the team and his ability as a player and his talent and all that is involved, it does feel like, okay, if the suspension is, let's say, 8 games or fewer, then, okay, the Browns have a shot to go to the playoffs this year. And it almost feels like if it's more than that, they don't. And it could be a lost season. Now, you never want to write it off before the season starts. And, I think they'd have to make another move at quarterback, depending on the length of the suspension. But, the Browns put all their eggs in one basket with Deshaun Watson when they traded, a net of 5 draft picks, including 3 first-rounders. Then paid him the record $230 million fully guaranteed contract because they thought he could raise them to a Super Bowl level. And if he's not on the field, that seems nearly impossible.
And the other thing is as you sit here and kind of watch it unfold, I can see Robinson's point that there have been different factions in the league because it doesn't seem like they've been all on the same page the entire. As you hear more and more about what's coming out of the hearings, it's apparent.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you had the NFL investigator, right? So that's that feels like a fact-based thing. Lisa Friel led the investigation. She talked to witnesses, and this is her report. But then I think Robinson's right, is that there's people inside the league. Some are definitely pushing for a long, indefinite suspension of Deshaun Watson, right? We know that. And then it's probably true that there's other people inside the league that don't think it's as big a deal, perhaps, or don't think it's worth that length of a suspension. And, that doesn't mean, I don't know if that influences Sue Robinson or not, because she's supposed to deal in the facts, but it's an interesting element. And I think it speaks to, the opinions of the fan base and the opinions in society. They're certainly varied, and it doesn't feel like a whole lot of black and white to this case. And, that's why I think we're still dealing with it on the eve of training camp.
Yeah, I'm with you. There seems like there's a whole bunch of shades of gray when you're dealing with the Deshaun Watson, at least what we know of it. All right, let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, as you might expect. This one about the Deshaun Watson situation.
Hey, this is Dale Burns from North Canton. I wanted your thoughts on the NFL having the burden of proof in order to suspend Deshaun Watson. Josina Anderson quoted on July 11th that it was by the preponderance of evidence, which means the NFL has to prove a greater than 50% chance that the claims are true. If there is no tangible proof, and it's one person's word against another, wouldn't that equal 50% but never exceed it? In that scenario, they could not issue a suspension. What are your thoughts? Go Browns.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Let me say this. We don't know what the evidence is, Scott. Nobody does except Sue Robinson and the people that presented it. I'm guessing there's some sort of text messages or Instagram. There's going to be messages that will be evidence. It's not strictly a he said, she said. There will be things that back up what he said, what she said. And that is the evidence.
Yeah, I think that's really important to note, Dave. And I also, I talked to one legal professor early on in this, and I said the same thing. Well, I said, there doesn't appear to be evidence. And she said, testimony is still evidence, right? So I think we want to say, well, physical evidence and a third-party witness, and that's not necessarily the legal definition of evidence. And, Sue Robinson can talk to, or can at least hear the depositions or hear testimony of both sides and make a conclusion based on that. So it's not necessarily he said, she said. She can take a judgment there. And, we know that, some of the leaked depositions that Deshaun Watson at least admitted to making one of the accusers feel uncomfortable, right? So I don't know if it's clear to just say it's one side saying, one side accusing and one side denying, because I do think there's areas in between. But I get the caller's point. Mm-hmm. But I do think I don't think you can take it just like, okay, it's a civil lawsuit. I think the NFL has its own rules and kind of makes up its own rules in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, they are the league. You work for them, for lack of a better term. All right, let's move on from this. NFL's most savvy move of the offseason. This is from 33rdteam.com. Those are the former NFL executives, and they have the Browns with the Amari Cooper trade. And it's easy to forget the trade given how early in the offseason it took place. Fifth round pick, and they end up getting a guy who is pretty much consensus top 10 wide receiver, something the Browns offense hasn't had in a while.
Yeah, I mean, they thought they had it with Odell, right? And I don't think he ever played like a top 10 receiver. So, yeah, I think this move looks better every day. And I say that largely given the contracts that a lot of these receivers signed after the Browns traded for Cooper, right? They're locked in at it's $20 million a year. Well, Tyreek Hill, right? The Dolphins trade for him and then pay him a ton of money. Cooper Kupp gets a ton of money. We know what the receiver, it's slipping my mind. The receiver that Jacksonville kind of screwed up the whole salary structure of receivers to begin with, starting free agency. So I think where the Browns, what they had to give up, which was minimal, right, in the one draft pick, and then what they're paying Amari Cooper for top 10, top 12, whatever he is, receiver talent, I think is a great value. And I agree that would be I think that'd be the savviest move this offseason. Deshaun Watson is such its own entity that you probably need to separate that.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, before we go to break, take a look at these. Madden 23 top 10 wide receiver rankings. Remember, the highest is 99. There's only one of those. They give it to Devontae Adams. Amari Cooper checks in at number 10 with a 90. Ahead of Chris Godwin, or at least tied with him. You got Keenan Allen and McLaurin at 91, Evans 92, Jefferson 93. And again, I know it's Madden, but it is a way of kind of measuring the skill sets of a wide receiver. And when you put it all together, it's a pretty accurate depiction of how good Amari Cooper is.
Yeah, I think that's about where he fits. It's interesting. I read a couple other top 10 lists this morning, and I'm not sure Cooper might have been just outside the top 10, but the names were different, right? They weren't all like the same 10 names. Jamar Chase was really high on one of these lists that I read, and he wasn't even on that Madden top 10, and then he tweeted about it today. So it's interesting. I think when you get to the receiver position, a lot of it's kind of the eye of the beholder and what you're looking for in a receiver. But I do think it's fair to say, I mean, he's a 4-time Pro Bowler. Amari Cooper's clearly the Browns' number one, and I think he deserves to be a number one on most teams, and he's a top, whatever that number is, 8, 10, 12, 15 guy in the league.
Yeah, you know, you're splitting hairs at that point in time between 10 or 12 because there are a ton of really good wide receivers. Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter for the Chronicle Telegram, as well as BrownZone.com, and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Talk about some free agents still available and best fits. One of them's with the Browns. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle Telegram, and I continue talking Browns. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. This one about the whole Deshaun Watson trade.
Hey guys, how's it going? I've been watching you guys consistently for a while, but I have a few questions I want to ask. My first is, why did the NFL not warn the Browns that they are going to try and get Watson indefinitely suspended before the trade went down? It doesn't make any sense to me. My second problem with this is that the NFL judge and NFLPA aren't being respectful to the Browns. This is dragging on too long, and they need to hurry up and get his decision so the Browns can figure out who the quarterback's going to be. I mean, it's not right that right before the season starts, they just lay down an indefinite suspension, and then we're out here looking for options at the last minute. I don't think that's right. And my last thing is, would a one-year suspension affect the Browns or Watson more? I feel that Watson would be way more not affected. The Browns would be more affected because we would be losing our starting quarterback, and Watson would be getting still paid. So that just doesn't make any sense to me. It just wastes the season. He still gets paid, so in the end it just screws us over more. But I appreciate you guys for listening. Thanks for taking time to listen to my explanation of all this, and yeah, thanks. Bye, guys.
All right, as always, we appreciate all of the voicemails. Scott, so as far as the trade goes, it's kind of buyer beware. That was looming. The 1 year, it doesn't really, everything is toll. So the contract is still 5 years. It just starts next year instead of this year. And right now, the NFL, one, wants to get the suspension fair or right, and they're not concerned about how inconvenient it is for the Browns to not know who their quarterback is.
Yeah, I do think there's recognition of it within the league that sooner the better. But, you know, Sue Robinson's an independent arbitrator, so she's not tied to the league in that sense. It took the league however long it took the league to investigate. And the reality is there continued to be new information to investigate up until recently. So I think that delayed the completion of the NFL's investigation. And, you know, to go back to but it is tough for the Browns. There's no argument there at all. I'm sure Andrew Bear and Kevin Stefanski did not enjoy this break, right? The break from minicamp to training camp that usually you can kind of regroup. I'm sure it was spent a lot worrying about Deshaun Watson in the quarterback situation because it's so important, in the fact that it could drag into the days before training camp. It already has. It's difficult for this team. There's no doubt about it, especially when they'll likely have to make a move at quarterback, depending on how long, if there's a suspension and the length of the suspension. I also think, going back to the caller's first point, I believe the Browns felt like it wasn't going to be a lengthy suspension when they made the trade. But like I said, more information has come out since. There's been more public interviews. We had the New York Times report, and I think those things, at least from a perception standpoint, made the sense that the league wanted to lengthen the suspension than maybe it originally thought in March.
Yeah, and the other thing is from the Browns' perspective, they want to get through this because at the other end of it, they feel like they have a franchise quarterback that they've been looking for since they've come back to the NFL.
You know, that's a great point. And you know, if you ask Jimmy Haslam and Andrew Bear in an honest moment, they might say that they still would have done this even if Deshaun Watson were suspended for all of 2022. I don't know that answer, but the importance of a franchise quarterback cannot be overstated, and we saw that in the trade and the contract that they paid him.
Yeah, I agree. You either have one or you're always looking for one. There is nothing else in the NFL as far as a franchise quarterback goes. All right, most underrated NFL free agents that are still available ahead of training camp is from the Bleacher Report. Offensive tackle Riley Reiff, and they say best fits the Steelers and the Browns. Starting caliber tackle who's been relatively durable over the years since starting 8 games as a rookie in 2012. Reiff started every game he's appeared in and has made at least 12 games in every campaign. Browns could use him as insurance for right tackle Jack Conklin. You see the cap space, $7.5 million last year. What do you think? My initial reaction is they feel Chris Hubbard is healthy and that's their insurance.
Yeah, I agree. I think it starts with Jack Conklin, and I think he's going to be healthy, right? Whether it's day 1 of training camp or day 14 of training camp, they believe he's going to be healthy and probably healthy for week 1, if not the majority of the season. And if you have that, then do you go spend, you know, relative significant money on a backup tackle? I think you're right, Dave. I think the Browns believe they did that with Chris Hubbard. They also have James Hudson III. I understand the report and why the connection would be made, but it's like a couple other positions. I think from the outside you view it and say the Browns might have a weakness here, might have a hole here, and internally the Browns like who they have on the roster.
I know you're getting ready to write some training camp previews. Tell us some things you're interested in seeing, you know, before we go to break here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do a feature on Dredge Wills. I talked to him right at the end of minicamp. I talked to Bill Callahan. I think he's hugely important, right? We talk about this offensive line being one of the best in the league. It's not unless your left tackle plays like a legitimate starting top 10, top 15 left tackle. And they drafted a number 10 in the draft to do that. And I think it's fair to say Jed Wills has not played at that level through 2 years. And last year was a lot about injuries, but he needs to play at a high level for this line to be what it needs to be, especially if you're missing Deshaun Watson for a while. And then, you know, you look at guys like Nick Harris, right? He's going to step into that starting role at center, it looks like. Anthony Schwartz, Jordan Elliott, those 2 guys at receiver and D tackle are 2 positions where we've talked about it 100 times, Dave. Man, do the Browns need to add at these spots? Well, not if Anthony Schwartz and Jordan Elliott take the step that the Browns expect them to take. And I think we're going to start to see that in training camp. Obviously, it's not the same as games, but they'll put the pads on the D-line. Can Anthony Schwartz stay healthy and get into that rotation at receiver? I think training camp will go a long way, especially for those two guys in those two positions.
Yeah, and those are both third-round picks the last couple of years that, you expect them to take a step forward. That's got to be fair.
Yeah, and I think if you're Andrew Berry and you're drafted those guys and spent high resources, you probably give them a longer chance than on the outside because you saw something and you keep expecting that something to show up. And I would agree with Andrew that it's too early to write either guy off.
Scott Petrick and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, some guys who could come out of nowhere and become breakout candidates. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a line. A long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrick from the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram as well as brownzone.com. This is from CBSSports.com. NFL out of nowhere breakout candidates, and they say one of them is Demetric Felton. Felton spent 3 seasons as a receiver at UCLA before shouldering full workload as a runner 2020. Averaged 5.1 yards a carry. 132 carries that season, 36 forced missed tackles, averaged nearly 3.5 yards after contact per rush. Scott, he's going to have a tough time. I don't know about you. I think Demetric Felton's going to have a tough time making the squad. I mean, that running back room is loaded, and there's a lot of redundancy in a wide receiver.
I'm completely with you, Dave. I mean, I guess it is an out-of-nowhere breakout candidate because I would not put him anywhere on my list. He's certainly in danger of not making this team. You mentioned running back, and even if they play him at receiver, which it looked like they were trying to do kind of in minicamp, but it was also passing camp, so maybe that's why he was spending more of his time at receiver. There's a lot of bodies there. You know, we talked about Cooper, there's Donovan Peoples-Jones, Anthony Schwartz, David Bell, Jakeem Grant. I mean, there's a lot of guys at receiver. I'm having a hard time seeing where he fits.
Yeah, I think he might be a candidate if he plays well. He might be a candidate that you can try to flip and get a 6th, 7th round pick for him because he's got talent. It's just loaded there. Who are some guys that you think that could be? And I know a lot of JOK and Delpit are fashionable picks. Who do you think's kind of an under the radar guy that he could have a big year?
That's interesting. I think a couple of rookies could. David Bell. I don't even know if I mentioned him in the receiver. I hope I did. I think he's going to play a lot or get a chance to play a lot. We know Kevin Stefanski really liked him coming out. Not the fastest guy, but sure hands, really productive at Purdue. So I think he could have a big impact early. Martin Emerson Jr., I mean, he was a 3rd-round pick, but he's the Browns' first pick of the draft. And that's another. It's a crowded room, but I know he opened eyes on the coaching staff, what he did in this offseason. And he has great size. You got Denzel Ward. You get Greg Newsome, but if Greg Newsome slides inside like he's expected to in 3 receiver packages, then it's either Greedy Williams or Emerson for that spot. So I think there's a couple of rookies that could have an impact early. And then, we look at that D tackle room. It's really an unproven room, and somebody needs to surface out of there.
Yeah, and there's going to be plenty of opportunities for them. All right, this is from Dog Pound Daily. 4 scapegoats if things go really bad for the Browns in 2022. Number 4, they have quarterback Deshaun Watson. Going to depend on how many games he plays. Number 3, the head coach Kevin Stefanski. Probably going to depend on how many games Deshaun Watson plays. 2, the front office. Not necessarily seeing that one. And number 1, Joe Woods and his defense. Yeah, Scott, saying that if they don't, say they're 500 again, who do you think? I don't know that any of those become a scapegoat.
Yeah, I mean, we need to know how much Deshaun Watson plays. If he plays all 17 games and they go 500,
yeah,
then you might be talking scapegoats. But, just looking at that list, I'd flip it. I think Deshaun Watson's going to get a lot of blame for if the season goes badly and he doesn't play a lot, or he comes back and doesn't play well or gets hurt. I mean, the guy hasn't played since 2020, right? So we're expecting big things because he's got that talent, but you wonder if it's going to take him a while to get up to get to where the level he played at in 2020. And then I would flop Kevin Stefanski in the front office. Andrew Berry has known the Haslam's longer than Kevin Stefanski has. Paul DePodesta's been here a lot longer. And I'm not talking hot seat or anything. I just feel like the coach often gets the blame, and the front office sometimes skates, especially if the front office is in good with the ownership, and it certainly appears that way. And then I guess Joe Woods, but I think the defense is going to be good. And, if Deshaun Watson doesn't play, I think it's asking a lot of the defense to carry this team. But if he does play, then I think the defense is going to be right along there for the ride, because I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, and they played really well last year. If they continue that, all of a sudden Joe Woods you're talking about him as people want him as a potential head coaching candidate. That's kind of, if they go into that elite status, that's the next step for Joe Woods.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And not to beat a dead horse, but really when you look at that defense, the question mark is D tackle. You feel good about the ends with Jadeveon Clowney back, right? You feel good about linebacker getting better with JOK, and they brought back Anthony Walker Jr. Maybe Jacob Phillips can stay healthy, right? You still have Taki. The corners are really good. They got the top 3 safeties back, which I think when the last season ended, the Browns didn't expect to get Ronnie Harrison back, but there wasn't a big market for him, so he came back. I think they feel really good with the only question at D tackle, and I'm sure the Browns feel better about it than maybe we do on the outside.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. Scott Petrak, as always, thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it, Scott.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, Scott Petrak, make sure you read him. Browns beat reporter, Elyria Chronicle, Telegram. Catch him, brownzone.com on the internet. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Legal analyst Daniel Wallach talking a little bit about the Deshaun Watson news on the other side of the break. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. Sports for CLE continues. We continue talking Browns. Charles Robinson, writer for Yahoo Sports. This is on the personal conduct policy, how it is applied in the Deshaun Watson case. It's from the Pod to Win the Game NFL podcast.
High-profile incidents that have happened with NFL owners that disrespect
why
would
should
be a
the
problem.
owner's behavior Why should the owner's behavior be punished like the players? They're the owners.
Because the league has already said the personal conduct applies to everybody. That's why. Now, I'm not saying now. You can argue whether or not that's true. It doesn't matter. Dan, your standard doesn't mean. The league standard means something. And they came out and said the personal conduct policy, that personal conduct policy applies to everyone, and owners have to be held to a high standard as well. And oh, by the way, they've also punished owners already selectively. Dan Snyder,
when they
for
want
example.
to.
Yeah, no, I know, but that's, again, whatever. You can say whatever you want.
It's all PR.
And again, that is Dan Wetzel and Charles Robinson talking about the NFL personal conduct policy as it relates to owners. This is a tweet also from Charles Robinson, Yahoo Sports. If Watson ends up incurring a full-year suspension that the NFL is seeking, either from the arbitrator or the league appeal of Robinson's decision, I'm told his camp is already ready to take the decision to federal court via a lawsuit. With that, let's welcome in Daniel Wallach, legal analyst, co-host of Conduct Detrimental. And Daniel, when you hear that, is that telling you they're lining up for the way the league has dealt with owners in the past as well?
Well, I find that comment to be somewhat curious because the personal conduct policy doesn't just say that the owners are held to a high standard. It goes further than that. The policy says that the owners are held to a higher standard and traditionally have been subject to more significant discipline when violations of the personal conduct policy have occurred. So right away, the policy is saying, well, we always apply it even more severely to the owners, yet in actuality, the owners have not faced that kind of discipline. I mean, Jerry Jones was sued several times, once by an exotic dancer in 2014 for alleged sexual misconduct. The league never investigated that. The league barely investigated Robert Kraft, who was charged criminally. No suspension, no discipline was meted out. So if that statement is true, in practice, the NFL is doing nothing. The NFL isn't even giving lip service to that statement. They're disregarding it, and they're actually treating Deshaun Watson potentially worse and more severely for the same type or range or category of misconduct for which the owners have traditionally skated. So they should have been held to a higher standard. In fact, they've been held to a lower standard.
Yeah, and again, you can go through there's Daniel Snyder, there's Jerry Jones, there's a litany, and it clearly states in there that the owners are held to a higher standard, and they agreed to that in the last collectively bargained agreement. All right.
I don't want to minimize the allegations against Deshaun Watson and posit here that because the other owners weren't disciplined, then you can't discipline Snyder. Then you can't discipline Watson. My apologies. Where that argument comes into play isn't for no discipline, but for a lower range of discipline. I mean, it just simply can't be because owner A, B, and C weren't disciplined, then you can never discipline another player. But to go from 0 games that Snyder, Jones, and Kraft received to 1 year, potentially, for Deshaun Watson, I think that's a quantum leap, and it would be an argument to militate in favor of a less severe discipline, such as 1 game, 2 games, 4 games. It's an argument to, if not entirely eliminate the discipline, to reduce it significantly so that it bears some reasonable proportion to the discipline or non-discipline that has been meted out with respect to owners who are held to, quote unquote, a higher standard. But it is also a credible argument for no discipline at all.
All right. Late last week, we heard that the Houston Texans settled 30 of the suits that were civilly filed against them in the Deshaun Watson case. So they settled all 30 of them. Does that affect the Deshaun Watson cases? Does it tell you anything at all about the Deshaun Watson cases?
It won't have any impact on Deshaun Watson's NFL disciplinary hearing because the evidentiary record in that proceeding is already closed. Judge Robinson held a 3-day evidentiary hearing 2 weeks ago before the Texans ever reached any settlement with these various plaintiffs or accusers. So the only bearing it could have, if at all, on Watson would maybe There could be some further discovery in the civil lawsuits against them, the 4 that haven't been settled, but it's not going to play a role in the NFL disciplinary process as it pertains to Watson. Now, the league can and should investigate the role that the Houston Texans played in this, larger alleged course of conduct. I mean, if they were setting up the reservations, booking the hotel room, providing the massage bed, preparing the NDA, which is probably the most the most guilty of actions, that they were aware that maybe something happened and they were trying to provide cover for Deshaun Watson. Well, they had an obligation as an organization to sort of apprise the National Football League that there may have been some alleged misconduct. They certainly or may have had a duty to come clean to the Cleveland Browns during the trade discussions. Do you think it might have bore somewhat on the trade asking price if the Browns were given all the information from the Texans that were in the Houston Texans, superior knowledge? It might have affected or altered the willingness of the Browns to trade for Deshaun Watson. I think they would have traded for him anyway, but it may have given the Browns a little bit more pause, or at least an argument or a counter negotiation or some ability to say, wait a second, we're not going to pay 3 number 1 draft choices because what you're telling me now tends to support the allegations that are made against Deshaun Watson. So if we're going to take on this added risk, take a player who's likely to be suspended, and you were part of this alleged course of conduct, maybe we shouldn't, maybe we walk away or we don't pay 3 number 1 draft choices. So it really bears upon the Houston Texans' culpability before the National Football League for conduct detrimental to the integrity of the game of football. I mean, the first call that Roger Goodell should make is, to his league investigators to investigate what role, if any, the Texans played. Now, the fact that they've entered into settlement agreements with waivers and releases with each of the individual named plaintiffs doesn't prevent the NFL from investigating this. And the NFL should investigate this, because if they're investigating Watson for his alleged primary role in the underlying conduct, why aren't they also investigating those who've allegedly aided and abetted it?
So the difference, 30 to 24, there's 6. Is there a chance that there could be 6 more suits filed against Watson, given the fact that 30 put the Texans as claimants? Or once you get down this road, does it get to the point where it just doesn't pass the sniff test when you're looking at this?
Well, I mean, by his own admission or from some of the reporting in this matter, Deshaun Watson allegedly saw 66 different massage therapists within a 2-year period. So hypothetically or potentially, he could be facing 41 more lawsuits over and above the 25 who have already sued him. And each incident, each allegation is a separate incident of potential misconduct, which can create a separate violation of the personal misconduct policy. Resolving these the 4 or 5 cases that are being considered by Judge Robinson don't prevent the NFL from presenting the cases of others in the future who might come forward alleging a separate incident involving Deshaun Watson. So I think we've likely seen the tip of the iceberg already in the 25 that have filed suit, that have been whittled down to 12 who voluntarily come forward, and then 4 out of those 12 that were deemed credible by the NFL. So it's unlikely that there is this groundswell of future accusers that are going to come forward and sue Watson and cooperate with the NFL. But no doubt there could be others. And if there are others, this disciplinary proceeding doesn't prevent the National Football League from investigating future incidents or future alleged victims that come forward as to allegations that took place during the same time period.
Fair enough. All right, before I let you go, take a listen to this. This is Dan Wetzel. It's on the NFL and the whole Deshaun Watson situation. This is, again, from the You Pod to Win the Game NFL podcast.
Yeah, I am cynical, but I have also been watching the National Football League and observing them and covering them for many years. They don't really want Deshaun Watson suspended for long. They want him on the field playing games. What they want is it to appear that they want Deshaun Watson to be suspended.
I agree with that.
They want it to appear that they don't want their owners going to the Orchards of Asia Day Spa on the day of the AFC Championship game. But in truth, the owners are the league. So if they come out with the punishment comes out 6 games and it's too short. Hey man, we tried to stand up for women. Let's do another pink jersey month. We care that, but hey, Deshaun's making his return Sunday Night Football. Let's go. 25 million a watch.
And Daniel, it is a cynical view, but again, it's about the public relations. And that's the bottom line is the league has to be concerned about the look.
Of course. I mean, there's not only a kernel of truth in what Dan and Charles were saying on that podcast, but I mean, Exhibit A for this is the Ray Rice situation. The NFL knew that Ray Rice had done all these horrible things to his wife, but until it was caught on tape, they felt they could impose a suspension that they could get away with it. And when the public began to say, wait a second, you've under-suspended him, you're only giving him 2 games or 4 games, then it becomes a different dynamic entirely. And in resolving the Deshaun Watson suspension, this matter easily could have been settled by the league and by Watson's team and arriving at some middle ground of 8 games. That's a level that both sides could probably live with, but the NFL will come under attack if they levy only an 8-game suspension or settle for 8 games when there are 25 lawsuits, 21 settlements, potentially up to 66 victims. They have to take a stand here, and they would much rather that Judge Robinson impose an 8-game suspension than for the league to consensually agree to an 8-game suspension, because then you have the findings and conclusions of law and sentence meted out by a 25-year plus retired federal district judge. It's less likely to be assailed by the public, by the media, or by anyone within league circles. But the goal for Judge Robinson, or at least the delicate balancing act, is where do you find a suspension amount where neither side will take an appeal that will be palatable to each party. And as I've said previously on the podcast, I think the 8-game range would be the bare minimum that the NFL could conceivably walk away from. And in Watson's case, 8 games gets him back on the field before the end of the regular season and provides the Browns and Watson with some clarity. Obviously, the best case situation for Deshaun Watson is 0 games, but there's very little prospect of that happening. And if he gets any suspension beginning with 1 game, or even if it's just non-suspension discipline such as counseling or a fine, that opens the door to the NFL taking an appeal directly to the league commissioner, Roger Goodell, who has the ability and discretion bargained away to him by the Players Association to modify that discipline upwards or downward, but we know it's going to go upwards based on the evidentiary record. And that is 4 or 5, based on those are very critical words. I'm not very good at math while I'm being interviewed, but the words based on the evidentiary record mean that Roger Goodell can impose any higher amount of discipline he wants without owing any deference to Judge Robinson's findings as to the suitable punishment, or even the findings as to whether and to what extent the violations occurred. The only limitations on Roger Goodell's ability to upwardly increase the sentence is if Judge Robinson finds that the personal conduct policy was not violated from Roger Goodell. It was not violated by Deshaun Watson. But the moment any discipline is meted out by Judge Robinson, that's a door opener for the National Football League to appeal to Roger Goodell and for Goodell to impose the recommended discipline of 1 year or more. And faced with that reality, I think Deshaun Watson's camp would walk away and accept an 8-game suspension because of the risk that Roger Goodell would increase it by more than double. And if the Players Association and Watson think that they're going to win this case in federal court, the Deflategate decision of several years ago essentially closes the door on Watson's team from succeeding in federal court, because under the Deflategate rationale, as long as Roger Goodell was acting within the scope of his authority under the CBA, the federal courts cannot interfere with or vacate his arbitration decision. And what is Roger Goodell doing in this instance? He's acting within the scope of the specific authorization that the Players Association ceded to him in the 2020 CBA by expressly conferring onto him the ability to modify the suspension based only on the evidentiary record and his reading of it. So I don't know what Watson's argument is. If you roll the dice with an appeal, take it to Commissioner Goodell on a let's say an 8-game ruling that you want to maybe reduce. He increases it to 16 games or longer. He's got no chance or next to no chance in a federal court lawsuit. That's why Judge Robinson's ruling here is essentially the best case or best chance that Watson has of getting out of the 2022 season, playing some part of it, because he won't get relief from the federal courts and he won't get any mercy from Roger Goodell. His best course of action and best chances for success in getting a less than 1 year suspension and in vindicating his disparate discipline argument is going to be with Judge Robinson. It's not going to come from anybody else.
Daniel Wallach, legal analyst, co-host of Conduct Detrimental, as always. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Daniel.
My pleasure joining you. Thanks for having me on again.
All right, again, that's Daniel Wallach, legal analyst, also co-host of Conduct Detrimental. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. On the other side of the break, Sports for CLE continues. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
We continue talking Browns here on Sports4CLE. Let's take a look. Pro Football Focus's 2022 power rankings. True contenders: Bills number 1, Buccaneers number 2, Rams number 3, Chiefs number 4, Chargers number 5. Could be their year. They say the Browns number 10. And so much of the success of the Browns hinges on Deshaun Watson's availability. Remains up in the air. With that, let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. Tim, I think if Deshaun Watson is available and playing quarterback, Browns are a whole lot higher than 10, but I get why they're at 10.
No question about it. If he's able to play the whole season, you can argue this is a top 5 roster and a team that certainly got a chance to go at least as far as, the AFC Championship game, depending on how much rust Deshaun Watson would have to knock off. And that's going to be a thing that happens no matter how many games he's suspended for. But again, the success they had this season is going to come ultimately down to how many games he misses. Obviously, the fewer games he misses, the better. I feel like the benchmark for this team to really have a good chance to make the playoffs is a 6-game or less suspension for Deshaun Watson. That way, he would play more than a majority of the season. You still get chances, the multiple games against the Bengals, that big tough stretch in the middle of the season that comes after week 6, those games that include matchups against the Bills and the Buccaneers, that back-to-back that they've got on the schedule. If it's 8 or 10 games, I don't think it's very likely. Obviously, if it's a full season, they're probably not going to the playoffs. So again, it's simply dependent on the status. Outside of Watson, this roster is as good as you're going to find in the NFL, but as we know, the quarterbacks are the ultimate difference makers, they're the ultimate margins for error in the sport, and if you got one that's available, it makes a whole world of difference.
Fair enough. All right, so Pro Football Focus is ranking the top 50 players in the NFL. They're counting down from 41 to 50 this week. Checking in at 44, Nick Chubb. Only thing separating him from Derrick Henry and or Jonathan Taylor, how little impact he has in the passing game, along with the Browns coaching staff's slight lightening of his workload. all right, I guess that's fair enough. But I think if you look at it another way, the slight lightening of his workload is the reason that he's likely going to have an extra couple years of playing in the NFL when you compare him to Henry or Taylor.
Exactly. I mean, the shelf life of the running back position in the NFL is notoriously short. And I think the Browns have done a pretty smart job on making it a platoon when they brought Kareem Hunt in for starting in 2019 to shorten the workload on Nick Chubb. And that's to get more years out of him, to get him playing into his late 20s, possibly into his 30s at running back. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of guys have the type of career that Adrian Peterson had, where they're the workhorse and they're still in the league, 10, 12, 15 years down the road. That's just not the way it is anymore with how physical the game is, how fast the game is, the physical toll it can take on a running back, especially now that you've had the 17th game. So, I mean, I get that argument. It makes a lot of sense why the Browns kind of do it that way. You keep them fresh, minimize injury risk, and you want those guys healthy for the games that count in December and January. But I think, putting him 44th seems really low if you're just counting just the impact he has, the fact that he doesn't have the carries that Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry has, while also noting the fact that despite not having that workload, he's still one of the better running backs in terms of yards gained on the ground in the league. That, I think, has to count for something pretty significant.
Yeah, and he averages over 5 yards a carry the last 3 years, or he has. So that's another thing. All right, before we let you go to a break here, let's take a look at this. One player who could surprise and make the Pro Bowl this season. This is from Browns Nation. They say David Njoku, and he's going to be the guy from the tight end position, likely going to be like the number 2 guy targeted. Let's also take a look at this tweet, and it lists the Madden ratings for the top tight ends, the top 15 of them, and you see Kelsey, Kittle at 98, 97. You go down, and David Njoku's not anywhere in the top 15, which to me seems a little low. I get the production hasn't been there, but if you look at the speed and you look at the blocking ability and a couple of the elements, I think you would grade him pretty high. So, again, I understand the production hasn't been there. The pieces and the parts of his game are there to be an elite tight end, I think.
No question. I mean, now we're going to get to see, obviously, what he does when he's the guy, in the tight end room. Obviously, the last 2 years, Austin Hooper was the number 1 guy, and with Njoku being the number 2, that really obviously took a lot of his targets away and a lot of his opportunities away. And I keep going back to that game against the Chargers that showed what he can do when you prioritize him, when you get the football in his hands, when you give him a chance to be an effective playmaker. Those are the kind of things you could certainly expect from him. It's probably not going to happen every single game this year, especially if Deshaun Watson misses a majority or all of the games this upcoming season. But it's going to be fascinating how they use him now that he's got another year of experience under his belt. He's got that massive contract that he's been looking for. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him to succeed. I think obviously he's got to do a lot to show that investment the Browns made in him, both draft wise and financially throughout his career. He's been here for a surprisingly long time. It's hard to believe he's been here since 2017. But I think, he's got to show that ability. He's got to show he's worth the money. And I think as long as he has good quarterback play and he's targeted, he's featured, I think he's got a chance to do those things.
Yeah, I would agree. And he was a young, raw guy when they drafted him. So it is time for him to take that next step. Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, talk a little bit about the quarterback position and what the Browns might do if Deshaun Watson is suspended. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a line. A long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. Charles Robinson, writer for Yahoo Sports, on the case that the NFL presented against Deshaun Watson in the disciplinary hearings and some of the issues with it. This is from the Pod to Win the Game podcast.
From what I understood, the way the league presented was there was a lot of focus on, because of the fact that the women that they brought into the presentation before Robinson, it wasn't the women that had alleged sexual assault. It was because those women were among the 20 who settled with Deshaun Watson. So it ultimately came down to women where, and this has been reported and it's true, the league, there was no like force. There was no, there were all these elements there that would really reflect poorly for Deshaun Watson that weren't necessarily there. So the league took this really narrow scope. And what I was told was a lot of it focused on disrepute. Deshaun Watson brought disrepute upon the league himself, his teams, through all of this, through his actions, okay? The problem with disrepute and arguing disrepute as it, concerns the personal conduct penalty, you have a hell of a lot of number of owners who, if there was a precedent of quote unquote disrepute, you would be in a hell of a lot more trouble than they really are. And we all know who those are. It's all the ones that have been sued or signed NDAs or had settlements that have been reported. Go ahead and look up the Dallas Cowboys and the cheerleader settlement.
And Tim Bielik, that's just another facet of this. That's why anybody that tells you they know how many games Deshaun Watson's going to get with the suspension, the only person that knows is Sue L. Robinson. I don't think she's told anybody.
Yeah, and part of me believes she doesn't know. And if she doesn't know, how are any of us supposed to know what's going on? And she's the one that's ultimately going to be making the decision. I thought the reporting from Charles Robinson talking about, how she may want to be giving the two sides a chance to settle. I think that's the easiest way for this to kind of go down, is go back to the negotiating table, see what you can work out, because I think with the buzz that's kind of come out the last few weeks, particularly in favor of Watson, that probably continues to push the indefinite ban, maybe the year-long ban, off the table. And maybe it's to a point where the NFL just kind of has to cut their losses and say maybe it's, half the season is kind of about where it kind of stands. Because, again, the last thing I think the NFL wants, considering the PR backlash, is for this to go to federal court. And I know what Daniel Walk was saying, Deshaun Watson's likely to lose, but you're talking again about a conduct policy where owners are supposed to be held to a higher standard than players, and then the owners kind of barely get a slap on the wrist for any of their transgressions. You're still opening this can of worms. And with the way the NFL didn't present much quality evidence, maybe it's almost in their best interest to try and settle to avoid, possibly not being put in a position to levy any punishment. Because again, if Judge Robinson comes out and says there's no punishment, case closed, the NFL won't be able to appeal, and Deshaun Watson's able to play week one. So maybe it is in their best interest to sit down with Watson and just try one more time to see if they can negotiate something before she makes her decision.
Yeah, and with all the NFL has going on, the last thing they want to do is deal with Jeffrey Kessler, who is the NFLPA's lawyer, and a lawsuit that he's going to come up with. You've got Schneider, you've got the Gruden. There is a legal mess that the league doesn't want to have to add one more on to.
Oh, no doubt about it. And I think the important thing we have to remember, as in this case with Judge Robinson, when it comes to these legal cases, she's going to look at evidence. That's kind of where we are in this investigation thing. It's the evidence that the NFL brought forward, and then the PR that's going to come off of this, how the league is going to look, say, if Deshaun Watson, if she says 4 games, but Roger Goodell turns right around with an appeal and says 17, it's just going to create a huge PR backlash. And I think these days, more than any other, perception matters just as much as reality. And it obviously, this whole thing is just a mess. So I think the best thing for everybody is just get some closure, just come to an agreement, just sit down at the table, work something out so everybody can move on before training camp, so it's not in Judge Robinson's hands. Because again, I've said before, she's a wild card because she's never done this before. We have no precedence for how she's going to go one way or the other in terms of, her ruling and her recommendation. So, I mean, maybe it's just come up with a known, pick a number that everybody agrees with, and just kind of move on, because this has just been, a mess, a messy situation that I think everybody just kind of wants to be over.
Yeah, I agree. The NFL can't get out of the courts enough and back onto the football field, and training camp is awaiting. Tim Bielik, as always, man, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
You got it. Thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
You too, Tim Bielik. Make sure you read them. Pages of the Plain Dealer, as well as on cleveland.com. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Mary Kate Cabot, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, as well as cleveland.com scheduled guests. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4.